Welcome, everybody, to the Last Mile Radio with Ryan Leaf. What a special occasion this is. This is our first in-studio guest, and, researching JJ, our next guest, was incredibly inspiring. It got me writing down question after question after question after question because of how I may have dealt with it. Our guest on the show today is JJ Velazquez, who spent 21 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit, and the relationship he built with Dan Slepian over that span of time until he was ultimately granted clemency in 2021 and then exonerated here just about 30 days ago because of the new DNA revelations in the technology. First off, just thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
First off, I love your personalities already. I think we fit in perfectly in this setting. My first question, and the thing that I couldn't get off my chest, was how could you walk out and not be the absolute most angry person in the world?
Well, to answer that question, we would have to talk about something we were talking about just before we even got on air. And it's about the service, right? So when I was incarcerated, there was a time where I felt helpless. You know, I couldn't help my mother. I couldn't help my children. I left behind 2 sons at the age of 3 years old, a little bit older than that, closer to 3.5, and 5 weeks old.
You didn't leave them behind, though.
Well, I was taken from them. I was actually kidnapped. Thank you for clarifying that. But the reality is that after several years of feeling helpless and then also realizing that I couldn't help myself get out of that situation, particularly after I blew trial, which was about 18 months after I was arrested, I was in prison, I started to lose myself. And I remember my mother, I used to always go on a visit and I used to wear this mask. And I always used to smile to my kids and smile to my moms. When I went back, I cried in my cage, right? And so I wore that mask until I couldn't wear it anymore. My mother saw through it. And she had told me, she said, they could lock up your body. I see what's going on with you. They could lock up your body. Your freedom is in your mind, right? And when she told me that they couldn't lock up my mind, I started to exercise that. I started to read certain books, and reading was like my escape. And so I came across 2 specific books that really helped me and elevated me as a person, as a human being. And the first one was Man's Search for Meaning, right? And so that was by Viktor Frankl, and he was actually a witness, a person who experienced the Holocaust. And I felt like I was living in the modern day Holocaust. And so he said that based on his research, that he was able to see that people survived because they attached themselves to a sense of purpose. And so I had to find purpose while I was in prison. And I realized that while I couldn't help myself, there were plenty of other people around me that I could help. And I started to help them. And once I started to realize that through a sense of purpose, you can live not necessarily vicariously through others, but for a person that's incarcerated, you're trying to figure out, how do I survive outside of these walls? How do I get felt beyond these walls and still exist in a society that's no longer my own? Right? Because that's how you feel, detached from it. But it was in helping others and in providing service to others that I found my salvation. And I'll never stop.
That's absolutely amazing, because it's exactly the same thing that transpired for me. I had an Iraqi and Afghan war veteran who was my roommate, who he just suggested we go down to the prison library and help a prisoner or prisoners who didn't know how to read learn how to read. Wow. That's it. I had so many of those come to Jesus moments in my life from coaches and mentors and things like that, and I don't know why in this setting it did. But did you notice or find out immediately? I tell people all the time, it's the forest. I can't see the forest through the trees aspect of things. I would have loved to have come back to my cell that night and said, "Oh, it's going to be gravy from this point on. I got this." I mean, when did that come to a place, and then when did it transition into the idea that you weren't just resigned with being that person in here any longer?
I think that's a very deep question, Ryan. I thank you for asking me. To be honest with you, in terms of trying to capture time and space.
Yeah.
After doing actually 23 years, 7 months and 8 days incarcerated, and fighting for justice for 27 years, I got lost in time and space. I can't capture at what points certain things happened, where my trajectories were. That would be hard for me to really give you a direct answer on. But
that makes sense because it's an overarching theme now. You understand it. Where it took place, where it rooted itself in your brain and affected change. It doesn't really matter. What
I do know is this, though. What I know is that once I started to experience the empowerment of seeing somebody else being blessed through some act of my own, it became addictive.
Yeah.
Right? And so that addiction continues to run through to this day and keeps my spirit alive, despite how many times I've been knocked down by this system.
What's give me an example of one of these acts of service while, being incarcerated.
I'll give you my most recent act, and it wasn't even while I was incarcerated, but it'll give you a sense of why I still do what I do. People ask me why, after fighting for 27 years to get out of prison and get out of, or 24 years to get out of prison and 27 years to get, away from the shackles of the injustice, right? Because I still had to continue time on parole under supervision, which is continued incarceration.
It is.
Right? And so I fought so hard to get out, but people often wonder why I fight so hard to get in. And so through the Frederick Douglass Project for Justice, which was the first organization that gave me an opportunity upon my release, I've been having the opportunity of going into several communities right now, 12 states to be exact, with 3 more states ready to roll almost before the year is out. We've been able to bring the communities into prisons, right? And we believe in human dignity through proximity. And I say that because we just did our first visit in Connecticut, right, at a woman's facility called York Correctional Institute. And as I went in there, I facilitate these visits between people in the community and people that are incarcerated. The people that I was bringing in from the community, for the most part, have never been in a prison.
Right.
Some of them have, though, because one of them was actually a superintendent of a juvenile facility in Connecticut and wanted to learn more from the women, how he can service the younger women, right? And so we go in there, and I realize I see this woman, and she's talking, and she's honestly, I can size people up because of my incarceration. I knew she was the leader of the group, and she was the one who could influence people, so I knew that I had to get to her. And as she's talking about herself, she's articulate, she's being really honest and sincere, but I'm also realizing that she's using her arms, and she has short sleeves on, and she has cuts all over her arms. And so now I realize that there's a new narrative, right? I have to touch this woman before I leave, because if not, I may have to report this woman to somebody, right? And so I make sure that when we break up into our small groups, that I'm able to really talk to this woman and get her to make a commitment in writing in front of me that she will not give up on herself. And she did it. And that may have broken certain rules in that facility or whatever, but it didn't break the rules of humanity. And so what I'm saying is that moments like that inspire me. There have been moments when people have considered taking their lives while I was incarcerated with them, and I was able to take them off that fence, take them off that ledge. There are people that could have gotten killed by people if I didn't step up and say, this does not make sense. And so I felt like I was placed there in a divine way to continue to be that safety valve for anyone who needed it, and to help other people in the smallest ways. Because sometimes all people need to change is somebody else to believe in them.
I mean, that couldn't be spoken more truthfully. The sliver of hope that someone has that can shift or change the perspective of them is monumental. I just can't get it out of my mind. Your perspective.
Sometimes you just got to live it.
Yeah. And I have, but I still can't. And maybe because I probably was a resentful, person for so long that I still reach to that sometimes, the idea of And the way my perspective would look at this, my mind would go, you took so much from me, and I can already tell by your eyes that it gave you everything.
Yeah.
And that's the thing people most frequently can't figure out about when I talk about how, like, the day I was arrested, my mugshot, or the 3 years I spent in prison ended up being the best thing that ever happened to me. I don't recommend it.
Neither do I.
For anybody.
I don't think it's the best thing that ever happened to me either, but
no. Well,
I think the insight that we acquired from our experience is the best gift that we may have been given.
Perspective. That semblance of hope. I want to make sure and welcome Dan into the show. Of course,
I'm enjoying the conversation.
Dan's an award-winning journalist at NBC News and a veteran producer of esteemed news magazines such as Dateline. And for nearly 3 decades at NBC, Slepian has spearheaded dozens of documentaries, hidden camera investigations, and breaking news reports referred to as a TV news gumshoe.
Yeah, forget about all this.
By the New York Times, Slepian's investigations have assisted in exonerating the innocent and sparked changes in laws. So, just when did you enter the picture?
It was Thanksgiving Day 2002. And I had been doing a story about 2 other men named David Lemus and Almedo Hidalgo, who were innocent of a murder at the Palladium nightclub in 1990. I knew nothing about wrongful convictions. I was a kid who grew up in Westchester who believed the system always worked just the way it should. And in this case, I had a cop saying these guys were innocent, and I was like, really? So I went to interview them that day. I interviewed the mother, his mother that day, and I walked into the lobby of Greenhaven Correctional Facility, and there was a woman standing there holding the hands of 2 little boys. And it was JJ's mother, Maria. And Jacob was on the little one on her right side, and JJ Jr. was on her left side. I always hate telling this story. There's something about this that just... Maria stopped me and she said, can you help us? I had no idea she knew who I was. My son, JJ's innocent. I mean...
I'm sure you hear that a lot.
I do, and now I know it happens all the time. But back then, 22 years ago, I was just scratching the surface of this pathological, irrational, hidden epidemic that's a moral stain on our society. Yeah. And by the way, I'm talking about mass incarceration, not only wrongful convictions. But she stopped us, and it stopped me, and it turned out that the guy I was doing a story on, named David Lemus, shared a wall with JJ. They were in cells next to each other. And David had told JJ I was coming. JJ asked his mother to wait for me. And I said to her, sure, I'll read whatever you want, but it's going to take a long time. And she was relieved. She was relieved because no one had been listening to her for years.
She felt heard. She felt seen. I tell people this all the time. The first part of service when I got out, well, listen, so I get out and, listen, no one wanted anything to do with me, right? I just spent 3 years in prison for burglary and possession, and I was this failed, junkie, felon, football player and all this. And I wake up the next morning after being incredibly grateful for spending the night in a real bed for the first time. Mom was cooking me breakfast, though that kind of, living in mom and dad's house at 38 years old is great for the ego. But my hometown newspaper ran an article, and it was a cartoon, essentially. It said, "Lock up your medicine cabinets, Ryan leaves out." And whatever hope that hope that I had, that I developed in there, it was dashed like that. Like, my immediate reaction was to numb it the way I'd always done it. And, but because of the work I did in there, I kind of disassociated, and I said, what changed? You made it about other people. So I went down to the mission in the homeless shelter. And I really didn't do anything. I just pretty much sat there a lot of the times and listened to what they were saying. Because I think they just hadn't felt heard or seen in so long. And I understand that feeling.
Yeah. So she sent me JJ's paperwork, and it was thousands of pages. And to make a long story short, I spent 10 years investigating his case. And I did a story on Dateline that was nominated for 3 Emmy Awards. And I'm saying that only because of not my patting myself on the back, but to explain how the journalistic community saw it as an act of journalism.
Yeah.
I had proven his innocence. And what happened is that the DA's office in Manhattan doubled down. They lied to the court. They hid evidence. They came after me. And so after that first decade, that second decade, everything for me changed with JJ completely. In 2023, I did a podcast that was a Pulitzer Prize finalist, and JJ, was not exonerated. And my book came out, The Sing Sing Files, in September, and 10 days later, he was exonerated. The President of the United States apologized to him. And if it takes a guy like JJ to be exonerated after that, everyone else is in really, really, really dire straits. And the other thing I'll say about JJ, when he talks about providing hope to other people, JJ provided hope to me. When I first met him, I knew he was different. I knew, we had long talks about this. As I mentioned before, I visited him more than a couple hundred times over 20 years. And we would have long talks about why this is happening to him. And
what were those conversations like? I mean, why is this happening to me? Why is this happening to you?
Right. I can't prove it, and he can't prove it. He taught me the term quantum entanglement.
Yeah.
I know it's true. I would go to air with it without ocular proof. I know it exists. My number kept coming up 11. Why is this number 11 always coming up the year before I meet him? I meet him, his birthday's 11/11. Just shit like that. You know what I mean? Okay.
Yeah.
So
no, you can say shit.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. But JJ. People often say to me, "Oh, look what you did for JJ," and it makes me uncomfortable because JJ has done so much more for me than I have ever done for him. By far.
We still fight about that one, though.
And so, like, you can't walk through Sing Sing without a guy coming up to you. Like, we volunteered together there. We started a program with a bunch of other guys called Voices from Within, which redefines what it means to pay a debt to society. So I've met hundreds and hundreds of people in Sing Sing. Dozens and dozens of them, when he walks down the hall, if it wasn't for you, JJ, they break into tears. And that's how I feel about him. There is JJ, and for me, there is no me without JJ. We're like Ivy. I am the man, the friend, the journalist, and more important, the human that I am, more because of him than I'm saying this, even including my wife and my daughter, in many ways.
No, he's given your wife and your daughter the best possible version of himself.
And by the way, my wife and my daughter love him. My daughter met him when she was 13 or 14 for the first time. My wife used to buy him food every month and has her own relationship with him. This is my family.
Yeah. And
what I saw in JJ early is what you see right now, is that unbelievable elegance and forbearance and forgiveness for what he's endured, all in the effort to change the world. And I don't want to exaggerate too much, but I know him very well. And I think there is he comparable in some ways to Nelson Mandela. Not in terms of JJ's going to be president of the United States, but Nelson Mandela had to suffer what he suffered to create the change that was necessary. JJ had to suffer because no one's going to change the system like he's going to, and I know that.
I can't begin to, imagine what I sat there more in a victim stance for actually committing the crime than you may have. I mean, how far along, JJ, did that into your incarceration? Not only that, the arrest, the holding, the trial. When you clearly saw the injustice coming, did that switch happen where you started making it about forgiveness? Because that would have been the hardest thing for me. I still right now I'm still angry about a few things when it comes to the people, and what I do is I I go and I give back, and that usually removes a lot of that resentment. But when did you feel like that was flipping?
You're bringing me right back to where we left off, because I told you about the first book, but I didn't tell you about the second book.
Yeah.
And so the second book was The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. And what I got out of that book, besides the 7 principles, the biggest thing for me was that between a stimulus and a response, you have the freedom to choose.
Yeah.
Right?
I'm teaching my 7-year-old that right now.
And so for a person where I felt like everything was taken from me.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that this also speaks to the level of gratitude that I have now, and the ability to forgive, is that when everything's taken from you, you start to see life in a different way. Right. Because it's all been taken. And so you start to appreciate the little things when they start to be given back. And sometimes maybe you're even more appreciative than you should be. But it's okay. Right.
It's never going to be not okay to if people view you.
You have to find balance.
That's got to be phony,
you have
right?
to find balance to survive.
That's
right?
the biggest thing for me. Is like they don't buy into the idea that how could you be grateful? Well, that's a you problem, man.
Right.
My deal is finding that.
Well, that's another book that I read too, where it talked about how people express themselves the way they do, but I have to give you permission for you to impact
affect you.
me,
Yeah.
Right. And so I decide whether I give you that permission or not. Whether you're a correction officer, whether you're a superintendent, whether you're another resident of a correctional facility with me, I get to decide what impacts me and what doesn't, not you, right? And so I got to master myself. And going back to that idea about stimulus and response, for a person whose freedom has been taken, particularly in an unjust way, you want to exercise that freedom to the best of your ability and as much as possible, right? And so it's not so much what happens to us in life that matters. What I learned from just reading that book, it's how we respond.
How you deal with it.
That's right. And so I chose, anger is a natural emotion. We all feel it. Mm-hmm. But I can take that anger and channel it into positive energy, a positive way that I respond to the issue, right? And in that way, I feel empowered over the situation and the individual who tried to bring me down.
I'll tell you something else. JJ is remarkably emotionally intelligent, and I've always known that. But JJ is not perfect.
Nobody is.
Right? And what I mean by that is, it's not a hit, what I mean by that is that one of the reasons is because of the trauma that he has suffered that is undeniable. And the way I've met a lot of people, he led me to other people that I did stories on that got out that he was still in, when he was still in. And everybody deals with their trauma differently. And I judge no one for how they deal with their trauma. I mean, what happened is horrific. But JJ has been able to challenge that trauma in a way. And one of the things about our relationship that I really appreciate and love so much, and I'm honored by, is that I've given him the permission to download on me. Like that he needs releases.
Yep.
And he is in the public eye more and more. And he is forced by society to play that role. Don't trespass. Be perfect. Don't ever do anything wrong. Be that guy we want you to be because you seem so great, right? And he really is doing that. And that is kind of who he is. But he needs that release. He needs to he gets angry like everybody else.
Are you kidding me?
And
same thing happens with the athlete. The same thing happens with me 10 years removed from the idea that, oh my God, this is a story of redemption. And it's like, it's not a story of redemption. It's just a story. This is my life.
Yeah.
Like, I still handle things incredibly poorly. My wife and I see a couples therapist because I'm a former NFL player and I communicate incredibly poorly. And I want to be have true intimacy with her and stuff, something I'd never had before in my life. So I understand that. And I understand my line for people is that we're all, life isn't fair. I don't care if you are starting an NFL quarterback or this, that, and the other. It's about how you deal with it that matters. I mean, it's the simplest faction of how to say it. To practice it is a whole different scenario.
Oh, absolutely.
And
I don't want to get off track here, but shouldn't NFL quarterbacks have good communication?
No, we're horrible. All we know how to do is run there or run there.
Right.
We don't have anything about feelings
Simple
or what you're going through. Yeah,
okay.
Simple communication.
No emotion.
No.
Okay.
So when I go into a conversation with my wife now, like maybe this is the whole point of like you can unload on me. I go to my wife a lot of times when she's starting to come to me with something, and I say solution or support.
Oh, I love that.
And that breaks it down completely because most of the time she just wants support.
We're about solutions.
She doesn't need a solution from me. Yeah. And it's worked both ways now too. I walk into the situation talking about something because she's proactive. She runs my business. She runs our business. And she's always proactive in terms of making solutions. And I finally coming back at her with this. I'm like, support. That's what I want right here. I just want you to let me vent and tell you the things I need to tell you. And that was one of my next questions to you. Having dealt with that trauma, continuing to deal with that trauma every single day, how do you deal with it? I mean, how do you go about it? Is there a regimen? Is there therapy? How does that work for you? Exercise, food?
I'm going to be honest with you, and I don't recommend this to anybody else. It's just what I do, and it's kind of what Dan does, and it's kind of like why we're tied together, like the ivy that he described earlier. This is all we do. And so the therapeutic approach to this is making somebody else's life better in some way. And that is my cathartic release through them, right? There's no stopping for me. Like, I'm losing my voice because just from the weekend to today, I've been back and forth. Matter of fact, in the week, I was in L.A., came back, was in San Fran, came back to New York, went to L.A., came back to New York, went to L.A., and I'm now I got off a flight at 1 o'clock in the morning to be here today. Yeah. And so, speaking about this issue and getting the message out to people is the job. And so I don't get normal sleep. I don't have hobbies. This is what I do. What I do to deal with this is more of this. And it may not be the healthiest thing in the world, but it's what the world needs right now.
Well, I can relate to that. I fully understand that. Like, my week off last week was spent in Florida helping people around the hurricane and speaking in 2 places. And it's, people talk to me about how inspiring a message can be. But in the end, it really has nothing to do with me. It has something to do with somebody in the room that needs to hear it. And it's not great to rip off your scabs in front of everybody, whether it's self-inflicted or, in your case, taken from you. But you're still doing it in the hopes that someone else can find that. And so I can relate to that. I understand where that is.
I'm glad that you do, but I could say this. I think that what has happened to me has traumatized me to the sense where it was like I separated myself in some ways from a lot of what I was going through. Just to be able to deal with it. Like, so I numbed myself in some ways. I desensitized myself in some ways. And in a lot of ways, what I'm starting to realize now, and a lot of people have been making me realize it over and over again, is that I escape focusing on myself by focusing on others. And the longer that I don't focus on myself, I'm only hurting myself more. And I'm starting to get that now.
It's something that concerns me about JJ. We've talked about it, and that's why I've said, as a journalist, my job, and for every story I do, I maintain a pretty rigorous detachment, right? We have a 22-year journey together where I love him like I would take a bullet for him. I would jump in front of a bus for him, right? This is my family. So, but at the same time, he's a public figure now, which he wasn't before. And I see what's happening and the pressure that he faces both publicly and what people don't know in his private life. And his default is to keep going. I can handle it. I'm built to handle it. So it's a bit of a balance, and that's why I've always said to him, look, and I think he's taken up on me maybe one too many times, but
use me.
He's probably right.
It's all good. Yeah. I'm good. But whatever it is, you dump on me.
Yeah.
Because it's safe. This is a safe place. And you need to let that out. And sometimes I think he needs to let that out.
Trust
more.
So trust has to have been something that was stripped from you like nobody's business. And this is someone you can trust with that. How has that continued to grow, or has it been nipped in its bud and you fight for where the trust can be? Let's say with relationships with your kids, haven't been gone that long. Where has that gone? You now diving back into all of this. Does that mean less time with them after all these years again, or is it allowed for more time with them?
It is. It's crazy because I was just having this conversation with my fiance yesterday, and like, I constantly put myself in this position where I have to look at, like, I don't spend enough time with Dan, who's a personal hero, a brother of mine, who showed me more about loyalty and relationships than a lot of people that I've had in my life, right? Except the only person I could say outside of him is my mother.
Yeah.
Right? And so those are my two heroes right there. And right now, the person who probably helps me with a lot of what you're talking about in terms of finding that inner peace is my fiance, which happens to be with me here today. And the reason why our relationship works is kind of like what you were saying. She kind of manages all of my business, all of my affairs, and it gives me the space to be me and to put myself and lean into others because she's leaning into me. And so the world should be happy that I have her, right? But like, it's just great to have people like Dan, like my mother, and like my children who understand my position in this world and what I'm out here to do. But, like, I lost almost half my life to something that I didn't do, I shouldn't have gone through, and my family shouldn't have gone through. And so part of my purpose that we were talking about earlier that helped me survive this whole thing was my sense of purpose and attachment also to getting back home to my family. And so now I've been home 3 years, and the time that I've spent with my family is actually minimal. It's great because the times that we do spend together are like the best moments of my life.
Right.
But the reality is that we don't do it enough. And so
because there's lives that they're leading.
The recipe to life is this, right? I've come home to a serious situation. Like, okay, for many years, I didn't have to worry about paying rent, right? The state was taking care of that. Not that it was the place that I wanted to live or should have lived, but I didn't have to worry about those things.
No, there was no responsibility.
Right? I didn't have to worry about food because I had my mother and I had Dan's wife, Jocelyn, who's my sister, who made sure that I had food, right? Now I'm home. I don't only have to worry about putting food on my table. I have to put food on the table of the people that I love. I have to help them with their situations. I left my children at 3 years old and 5 weeks, came home to them at 27 and 24. And they're about to be 30 and 27. And so all those years that they lost of having a father at home cultivating what their lives should be, like they should be on career paths now. They're not. Why? Because they had something lacking in their lives. It's called a father, right? They lack the ability to have a father present in their lives. I lacked the ability to be a father present in their lives when I wanted it more than anything in the world. And my mother didn't have a son to help her through her struggle. And then on top of it, she had to be the father that I wasn't to my children. And so I've been trading my time for money, right? And because the cost of living is so high, I haven't been able to spend the quality time that I fought for to come home to my family.
I mean, you think about all the spokes on this wheel. That one spoke that he just said about not being with his kids and his mother, I know the guilt that he feels by that. And JJ being who he is, there's nothing anyone that's ever going to change his mind. He's responsible for those kids. Yeah. And he will always be responsible for those kids. And he needs to make it up to them, even though it's not his fault. And that's who he is. And that's just one spoke of all of them. There's so many that goes into this. And I'm in awe of him every day because, look, I've witnessed him and I've witnessed this process. There wasn't a day that went by that I didn't think about JJ or his kids or JJ lying in that cage every night, every single fucking night. And, in my book, one of the things that I say is that, and even now I feel it, that it's like my own PTSD for it, and then I feel guilty feeling what I feel given what he had to endure.
What's the
I know
what's the accountability from this? What you talked about the Manhattan DA's office and coming after you and doubling down. What's been the account to this?
I'm only going to answer it this way, which I often do, not related to JJ's case. There's a former detective in Brooklyn named Louis Scarcella, who's responsible now, we know, for at least 24 false confessions, if not more. The New York City taxpayers have already compensated those victims $150 million. Former Detective Louis Scarcella is not only a free man, he still collects his pension from the NYPD. That's the accountability. There is no accountability. Yeah. And so, he didn't even get an apology. He's provably innocent, and he didn't even get an apology. So there's so much that needs to change. And by the way, one other thing I want to say is that for people who are listening to this, who think it's not going to happen to them or think it's not going to affect them, they're wrong in various ways. Primarily, his son, who hurt somebody, not badly, got in a fight with a kid. That kid was hurt. He didn't do anything because of what happened to him. Families, communities. And the second thing is, and this is in my book, and I think it's going to resonate with you because, look, I'm an investigative producer. I did my research on you. Your cellmate, drunk driving.
Mm-hmm.
I put an anecdote in my book where last year I was stopped by cops after I got in an accident, and they gave me a breathalyzer because the homeowner said I was drunk, which it was a Sunday. I had a breathalyzer at noon. I had a Bloody Mary at noon. 6 o'clock, I was nervous. And I blew into the tube. It was .01, and everybody relaxed. I didn't even get a ticket. But then I was thinking, what if I had a couple drinks before I went out, which I often have?
Right.
What if a child was playing behind that fence that I hit and I took her life? I'd be looking at 25 to life. That doesn't make me a bad person. But that would have been the weekend that society saw me as someone with a right to human dignity, to some other invisible line of decency that I deserved whatever I got.
Mm-hmm.
And it is through the prism, starting meeting with JJ, through the innocence movement, that I realized, and I can never talk about innocence without talking about mass incarceration and people who made mistakes as kids. And what I realized is that there are bad people who do bad things,
mm-hmm.
but there are not many of them. Most people are really, really good people who made bad mistakes as kids.
I didn't know anything about the justice system. My interactions with law enforcement was limited to getting a speeding ticket growing up. So I got a crash course in it. I got to go into the process of, it was just so amazing to me that everything that goes into it, right? You're locked up, you're booked, you go through the whole process, you step in front of a judge, you say not guilty, and then you get ready for trial, and your attorney and the DA, they work out a plea deal.
And you're given a number and a uniform, and you're stripped of your identity.
Well, I stood, you can document, you can see this, you can Google pretty much everything that I went through in the process. Is I standing in front of that judge, and I absolutely am imploring him, I could have got 20 years for the burglary. And if he wanted to be consecutive, he could have given me 5 more for the possession, which is 25 years. And so I actually asked him for that. The masochism too, I don't know what it was. Drama-free Ryan in a community, my family and everybody, Also, I just wanted to be dead. And maybe that would help the process. But I watched it, and then I got, while I was in there and I didn't do anything, I got super consumed with the crime drama and the datelines that came on and everything like that. And what it came down to ultimately...
We do a Dateline on you?
I don't think you can do a Dateline on me. There's no he did it, so therefore he.
Oh, I thought you said the Dateline. I'm sorry. Okay.
No, I just watched Dateline. I just watched Dateline.
Good. All
No.
right.
And what it turns out is it's just these two people stepping up in front of a group full of people and telling who can tell the better story. But the thing I can't get, is they make themselves believe it so much that the people that are invested in the fact that they are found guilty or not guilty, they're willing to die on a cross for that truth. With everything you showed them. It doesn't matter.
Oh, bro. Yeah, I don't even know how it works. Like, JJ's innocent, here's the water.
Yeah. That's Kool-Aid.
Right. No, it's an elephant.
Okay. Same virus.
Exactly.
Yeah. I had a locker room with Warren Sapp and Keyshawn Johnson, and Warren Sapp's the only guy I've ever seen make Keyshawn Johnson shut up. But Warren would flat out, if I told you the sun was yellow.
Right.
But he said it was red.
Right.
It was red.
Right.
And I've come across those types of people through this process, the justice aspect of things. And then to stand in front of a judge and then find out and learn more about the for private prison systems and know that it incentivizes judges and DAs to look for prison time because they've signed deals with the state that they have to be 90% full or they're paying the full rate anyway. These are things I would have never conceptualized in my life, because why would I? Until you've experienced it and understand it and the perspective you have around it. So
it's literally, by definition, it's pathological.
Yeah.
And irrational, because we know it works.
Yeah. Treatment.
Education, treatment, opportunity, vocational training. That's it. You do those things, like water puts out fire, that puts out crime. We won't do it because we don't feel like it's the right thing to do as a society.
Well, we've been told it isn't. Yeah. And I think like anything, and that stands with the stigma aspect of things, right? Stigma is something that makes you believe that someone knowing something about you is worse than you actually getting the help to relieve that process. And like, you don't wake up one morning and look at a person and go, or are born one morning, look at a person and go, that person's strange, that person's a problem. You've been taught this, and we've been taught this for so long. You're a drug addict, you're a criminal, you're bad.
Exactly right.
And so therefore you need to be where the bad people go. And we don't have to think about you again.
All of a sudden, drug addiction is, you're a bad person, you're a criminal. Mental health, you're crazy, you're a criminal.
It is
crazy.
A medical condition.
Right.
And if I could tell you that there is a solution based where you can go into remission and treat it and have the life that you want, people would jump at that. And I've been using it lately with families around the aspect of disease. Any sort of disease, right? You have two families on a block. One child is diagnosed with leukemia. The other child is diagnosed with a mental health disorder. The difference in which those families are treated, the difference in which one family is a GoFundMe page is started, food's being brought over, community support, the other family ostracized, gossiped about. What did the parents do wrong? And that's not anywhere near where the real truth lies. The truth lies they're both medical conditions that can be treated and go into remission and have fruitful, healthy lives. Mm-hmm. And until we continue to shine a light on it, and don't get me wrong, the process in the 60s around the civil rights movement, we're still struggling our asses off with that every single day, but we've come a long ways. But we may not be around to see the actual fruition of it. Same with anything we're doing with stigma around those types of...
Oh, by the way, I say all the time, I think this is the third incarnation of the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
And I think we're in like 1935 or 1940. I think that we're just getting started. We're just scratching the surface in my lifetime, our lifetimes. I don't think we're going to see... I mean, I often say, like, 300 years from now, hopefully people are going to look back at this time like we look at slavery. What we're doing is insane.
Yeah.
Rikers Island, the worst place on earth, do you know it costs $500,000 a year to keep one detainee there?
No.
New York State, it costs like $60,000 a year. New York City is it's a $2 billion budget. LA has a $1 billion budget, twice the amount of detainees. I figured out that you could send 95% of that budget doesn't even go to them. It goes to unlimited sick time leave for officers.
Yeah.
I figured out you can send this is pre-trial, each detainee to a Four Seasons hotel for a year with a dedicated social worker and save the New York taxpayer money. That's what we're doing in New York.
The idea, and I said this a little I think I said this in a previous episode around the governance of people with power over people who with none, and how that's continued and has spanned generation after generation after generation. And you would think at some point someone, like watching the Washington Commanders the other day throw a Hail Mary, why doesn't somebody just bring 6 guys and put 5 guys back there for the touchdown? Why hasn't a defensive coordinator figured that out? It's pretty plain and simple to what goes on, but the people that have the power, they don't want to change it.
We're changing that, though, and you're part of it. You know, what's happening is that this is what I feel. I feel justice is coming into season. I think that there is an army forming. Mass incarceration started in 1970. A lot of the people who were locked up at the peak in the 90s and the early 2000s are getting out. People are starting to hear the stories of JJ and others and you. And what's happening is jobs like mine and others, to make sure people understand what's at stake, touch hearts, touch minds together. That's why we go around, we talk to students. I just spoke to Georgetown. They say, what can we do? I say, you need to figure that out. You are the future. So my belief is that an army is forming. And I feel like a soldier in a war. And I feel like we're together we all just have the same armor on. And I think the troops are gathering. And over time, justice will win. That's what I believe.
I believe you. I do.
Maybe not in our lifetime, but you know what?
But
Rosa Parks had to sit. She had to sit in the front of the bus for something to change. Rosa Parks. You never know what's going to be that catalyst. That's right.
You talk to you about it.
He is a catalyst. That's what they call him. They call him a catalyst.
For 26 of the 32 months I sat in there, I did nothing. And then there was this moment. Now I didn't see it happen, and it was a few months later. But it's about consistency. It's about doing it over and over, like anything you do. But I've started to find that I was more personable, and I was sleeping better, and I was talking to my family, and those were 3 things I hadn't done in probably a decade.
Right.
So now I can go back on the timeline and kind of go, okay, but I still find myself with old behaviors that crop up because, life is unfair.
Because you're human.
And I'm human, and I'm flawed, like every other human being, and I'm trying to be better.
So is life.
Every day, yeah. And I think the most inspirational thing I can take away from your story, simply because I've tried to follow in those footsteps unknowingly, is that the commitment to the service of others. And because I don't know if I could have let it go if I was wronged, because I don't believe I was wronged at any point. I don't. The accountability piece in all this, I am here because of what I've done and nobody else. You couldn't look in the mirror in your cell and say that. That's what changed for me, is when I was able to look in the cell and go, I'm here, Ryan, because of what I've done, no one else. I can't blame the media. I can't blame the NFL. I can't blame the doctors, my hometown. I can't, whatever their part in it, what was my part in it? Mm-hmm. So that would have been very difficult for me to get over. And so this is going to help me. So you continue to prove your point around the idea that you'll have a hand in saving someone else's life, because the next time somebody, where I feel wronged or anything like that, the injustice aspect of it, I'll be like, you talked about books. Unbroken was that book for me in prison, the Louis Zamperini story. Like, this dude went to Berlin, and if it wasn't for Jesse Owens, would be the fastest, dude in the world. Then he goes to war after being drafted and gets shot down in the Pacific and is in the water for like 80 days, where one of his soldiers friends was eaten by a shark. He goes into a POW camp, and he comes out of it, after 3 years. And then the thing that almost brings him down is the alcohol, because he can't deal with all the trauma that came with it. And then he's saved by a higher power. And I remember thinking when I read it, going, I can never complain about anything again. Like, this is not, and your story now can be that for me.
Well, I'm glad
a real one,
a real life version of it.
Yeah,
well,
we're going to be friends, aren't we?
Absolutely.
We live like right down the street from each other now too.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
I love it.
JJ is a historic figure. I mean, he's lived in a cage for 24 years. I'm not surprised because I knew him.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised because I saw it 20 years ago. But don't forget, he's been out for 3 years. And what he has done so far is extraordinary. I'm not surprised because it's JJ. But it's just the beginning. And
I can't wait to see it.
it couldn't be. Are we allowed to be friends too, by the way?
We are allowed to be friends too. Community is amazing, isn't it? The way you're able to travel around this country now.
Yeah.
And how your community continues to grow. You'll have met people, and I'm sure you can understand this, and I have too, in places that you never thought you would meet and develop
Absolutely.
friendships now the rest of your life, and I have done that too.
Absolutely.
That's what happens when you make it about other people.
Yeah.
That's
like
what
your,
it's all
your
about.
life gets better, and I don't know if JJ's story is a more beautiful testament to that. So
No, thank you. But
I
I
agree.
think that the last point to make, just based on what you said, was I may be giving a lot to a lot of people, but as I continue to have that community grow, that community's giving a lot back to me as well.
it's always the biggest.
It's reciprocal.
It's always the biggest point people make to me. Like Ryan, you've had such a hand in saving so many people,
Yeah.
and I'm like, you would not believe the amount of people that have been saving me.
You already just gave me one today. Support or solution. I need that, right? That's
Yeah.
going to help me in my relationships.
Oh,
You like that? Yeah. Yeah, she likes that. His fiance likes that.
You said
Oh, my
catalyst.
fiance's hiding behind me.
Oh, there you are.
she left.
She left.
She left.
You said
All right.
catalyst. You said catalyst. He's got a catalyst button.
I mean, I love that statement. I think it's an incredible identifier for. I think I've met a lot of those people that just champion people to do the next right thing, and to champion people when they've fallen. I think that's the bigger one. Like, especially in your and I's situation now, we're on a pedestal a bit. You talked about it. You have to unload sometimes. Like, I don't want to be perfect.
Right.
Because I'm not, and I don't want you to think I'm perfect just because I do that. So I need that ability to when I fall, because I'm going to, and I have over the last 10 years, I want to know that's okay, to not be okay, and not to feel judgment from people because of it. And to your point, another thing I learned today, more importantly, you ultimately decide on who you let affect you.
That's right.
It's going to be, you got to be careful, especially when as you become more high profile.
Yep.
You don't know who's coming at you for what, and so it's.
And I've been picking some fights lately, and I probably shouldn't, but
there will never be a day that JJ stumbles. Well, I will not be there for him ever.
and I know that I can count on my hand though the people that will.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to be taken down by the yes men and the people that weren't there when the shit hit the fan.
Yeah.
You figure that out pretty quick.
Yeah.
You do. You figure that out pretty quick. Who really has your back? I love it. You guys are welcome back anytime.
Thanks, Ryan.
This has been an awesome.
Absolutely.
This is why I took this show, people.
By
This
the way,
is why
when
I
you
took the
guys
show.
exchange numbers, he'll give it to me. Don't worry about
I'll
it.
give you mine too. Don't worry about it. JJ Velazquez and Dan Slepian, thanks for joining us today on the Last Mile Radio with Ryan Leaf.
Absolutely.
What a pleasure.
Okay, I don't know what else to say. That was awesome. I got the coolest job in the world, people. You know that? Karma's real. It really is. You listen to the Last Mile Radio with Ryan Leaf. We'll see you next time.